Okay, we're having them all coming in. I think it might take some time getting everybody in the room.
Okay,
Um, let's just give them 1 or 2 more minutes. Okay, welcome, teachers. I see, we're getting more and more people coming in the waiting room. I'll continue to allow them in. But from my side, I just want to say welcome so much to this afternoon's training. I'm so happy to have Professor Timothy Rasinski with us this afternoon. Hello, Prof. Welcome to Phonics to Meaning.
great. And thank you for having me, Minda, and all the teachers out there. Interesting to think that it's 2:30 or so in the afternoon, and here where I am in the U.S., it's 8 in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. It's amazing what we can do with technology now. Anyways, what I'd like to do today is spend a few minutes with you, maybe a little bit more than an hour. I hope you can stay a few minutes past an hour, and kind of build on what was in the last session last week, going from phonics to meaning. I want to mention before we get started that I have put my email address out there, and you notice it highlighted in green. It's trasinsk@kent.edu. And I mention that for a number of reasons. First of all, if you have any questions, thoughts, or insights would like to share with me, please do. I do answer every single one of my emails, so I'm happy to do that. And I'll also mention as we go through here in a few minutes some resources that I can send your way there. I'm going to mention my book here. The Mega Book of Fluency is one that, if you're a good follow-up to today, just came out a few years ago in a second edition, and it's already won the Teacher's Choice Award, and has gotten some great reviews. So I know Minda is working with the company trying to get some of these your way. Another book that just came out last month is the Mega Book of Vocabulary. Now, we're not specifically talking about vocabulary today, but we all know that knowledge of words is pretty important when it comes to reading and language here. One other one that I think was mentioned last week is the fluency development lesson. And I'm actually going to be talking about that a little bit more later today. But again, it's one of these books that has been well received in our field here in the United States here. One other thing I'll mention before we get started is I have a website, and it's timrasinski.com. It's in the handout. Um, and I'll just mention it because that my website is full of free resources that are good follow-up today. So if you get a chance this evening or tomorrow, go to timrasinski.com and just explore some of the things that are there. Everything there is free. You can download it, you can share it, and certainly, hopefully, you'd find much of it helpful. And this is the one I want to mention about my email address. You see it up there again. For the past 8 or 9 years, I've been sending out 3 resources every week during the school year. Monday Morphology, which is a focus on vocabulary, Word Data Wednesday, and Fluency Friday. And if you'd like to get these resources, drop me an email when we're done here, trasinsk@kent.edu. And as I say, please put me on your resource list, and I'll be happy to. And I'll keep you on it until you tell me to take you off here. I do have to mention, though, here in the States, our school year runs from September to August to May or June. So during those summer months here in the States, June, July, and August, I probably will not be sending out anything. So um, if you sign up for my resources and don't get them immediately, that's the reason. I'll be starting up again in late August or so. But it's all free, and I'm happy to share. One of the things I think you're familiar with is the science of reading. It's pretty much worldwide. We're learning about the importance of the science in teaching reading. And I'd like to tell you that I'm a scientist. I've written research articles, and for 3 years now, 2021, 23, 26, I was identified as being among the top 2% of scientists in the world. I'm not sure how that came about, but I'll take it. But here's the other thing. I'm also an artist, and I hope you are too, because we have to be both scientists and artists. I love this quote by Felicia Rashad. She says, "Before a child talks, they sing. Before they write, they draw. As soon as they stand, they dance. Art is essential to human expression. And that's so true. We have to. I have 8 grandchildren now, and all of them are in that age where they're emerging into reading. And how are they doing it? They're doing it by singing. So I'd like to start by building fluency with you guys in an artful way. How do we do that? We do that by singing. So here's a song one of my favorites, and I know Sam knows it out there. I'll let him hum around, hum with me. But if you don't know it, just
Okay.
and I'll tell you where you can find it here. It's called the Garden Song, and you'll notice I call it a metaphor, and I'll tell you why in a second here. But here's how it goes: inch by inch,
Inch by inch, row
row
by
this
gonna
garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rain comes tumbling down. Then it has a couple verses to it. Plant your rows straight and long, season with a prayer and song. Mother Earth will make you strong if you give her loving care. Old crow watching from a tree, he's got his hungry eyes on me. In my garden, I'm as free as that feathered thief up there back at the beginning. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rain comes tumbling down. Another great song. And it does have several verses to it. If you're interested, you can actually find it on YouTube. Search The Garden Song, and you'll find actually several versions of it. One of my favorites is by John Denver on The Muppet Show many, many years ago here. But the reason I call this a metaphor is because teachers and tutors were gardeners. I know some schools like to think of us as factory workers, but if you truly think about it, as teachers, we work in a garden. The plants that we grow are our students. We plant the seed, we nurture the soil, we water the plant, and that student, that child, grows into a full-fledged reader. So, what a tribute that is to teachers all around the world here. I sing with kids all the time, and I'd like to tell you why. There's actually several reasons. First of all, it's fun. Brain scientists tell us when you and I sing, our brain releases those chemicals that make you feel good. That's why some of you might sing in the shower every morning. We also sing because it's aesthetic. Songs have the ability to touch the heart, not just educate the head. How many of us have a song that would bring us to tears or send a chill down our spine? And children need to have those kind of aesthetic experiences. And I'm not sure that they're getting it as much as they need to. And finally, we talk about culture and content, vocabulary. Song and poetry are filled with that. I often tell people when I talk here in the States is you can tell the story of the United States through song and poetry. You don't have to even read informational text for it. So all those are reasons, but there's one big reason why we sing, and of course you know what it is. It's reading. What do you do when you sing a song? You have the words in front of you. You're reading some of the very best material for developing not only reading fluency, but word recognition, comprehension, vocabulary, the entire array. I'd like to kind of situate what I talk in the science of reading. And so I'm going to share with you this article that came out
oh,
2 years ago by Richard
Tim,
Ellington.
can I interrupt for just a second and say something about singing? And I apologize for being a bit late, but
We're limited on time, Sam. So
right. What I want to say is, it's okay to use. It's especially okay to use songs for that the kids know from your culture, and that's something that we're really big on. So that's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, good point. Yeah, make sure you use whatever songs are top tier songs within South Africa, wherever. And of course, there's some songs that are universal. Okay, back to this article. Richard Allington and Anne McGill Franson wrote a study on volume of reading. And it's something we already know. To become a better reader, you need to read a lot. And that's what they found. Kids who read a lot are our best readers. Well, now I'm going to take you back to another study done by the same persons, Richard Allington. This one was done in 19, I believe it was 82 or so. If they don't read much, how are they ever going to get good? What he did with his colleagues was they sat in on classrooms that were filled with children who struggle in reading. And all they did was they counted the number of words kids read. in context, right? In story-like reading or poetry or whatever it might be. And what they found was that the students read about 43 words per in context per student per day. Isn't that, it's pretty pathetic, isn't it? 43 words, hence the title of the article. How are they ever going to get good if they don't read much? Well, I did an analysis of the song that we just sang. And even though it only took about 2 minutes to sing that entire song, we read 140 words. We read 3 times the number of words that the students read in that study. If you want to increase reading volume, find ways to increase it, not just poetry, much song, but poetry as well. Informational text, all kinds of material here. In fact, one of my favorite stories goes back now 16 years. Here in the US, one of our best teacher education colleges is at Columbia University, Teachers College. And in August of 2010, I was invited to give a presentation there. And we started by singing some songs about New York. East side, west side, all around the town. The tots sang Ring a Rosie. London Bridge is falling down. Boys and girls together, me and Mamie O'Rourke. We tripped the light fantastic on the sidewalks of New York. And then we went on with my lecture. But here's what happened. Remember, August of 2010, the following April, out of the blue comes an email from a first grade teacher, Becky Awasaki, who is a first grade teacher in Danbury, Connecticut, and she attended my workshop. And this is what she wrote to me almost 8 months later. I challenged myself on October to begin singing with my students, and we have been singing ever since. I've never seen so much progress in reading. Every one of my first graders is reading on grade level or higher, and they love to sing. Well, I ended up calling her up on the phone. I said, well, tell me more about what you did. And basically, she said I would introduce 2 or 3 songs on Monday, and throughout the week, we would practice them at the beginning and end of each day. And on Friday, we'd have a hootenanny, a celebration of the songs that we learned. Always with the words in front of the kids, always prompting them to look at the words here. And what she found was that by the end of the year, every one of her students are reading on grade level. And that had never happened before in her 21 years of teaching reading. So the only thing she could really attribute this to was this work on reading fluency and through the use of song. She and I actually wrote this up for an article for the reading teacher. Let's bring back the magic of song for the teaching of reading. This is on my website if you'd like to get it. And it's a short article, but it talks about what Becky actually did. But it's not just first graders, our younger kids. There's another study I did with middle school kids, sixth graders, 12, 13-year-olds down in Florida. And we did much the same thing. We developed a program where the students would put on the headphones and they would read their tablets, song lyrics, at the same time listening to the song being played. 20 minutes per day for 2 months. What they found? The students made over 7 months progress in reading. They were tripling the progress you would normally expect them to make. And it wasn't simply in a matter of them reading faster or more accurately. They did that, but they also read with better comprehension, which of course is the key. I often call the fluency the bridge to comprehension here. And it's not just song, but think of it, the poetry, the rhythm, the rhyme, the melody, in both song and poetry make them so easy to learn. How many of us, even as adults, know poems or songs that we perhaps last heard song or read 10, 15 years ago, right? There's something about these texts that make them so memorable. In fact, this just came out a few days ago in the Hetchinger report. Want to boost early literacy skills? Try singing. And then I added to it, I said, try poetry too, because of the rhythm, the rhyme, the brevity. In fact, I'd like to recommend a book for you if you have time. I know teachers, you're really you don't have a lot of time right now, but this one here by Lois Letchford, it's called Reversed, and you can probably tell from the title there, it's about dyslexia. It's about her son, Nicholas. Lois Letchford was a mom who lived in Australia. She had 3 sons. The first 2 sons went through school perfectly well and were, advanced readers, advanced students. It was her youngest son, Nicholas, who ran into trouble. In fact, he had so much trouble learning to read, he was called unteachable by his first grade teacher. So it actually was left up to Lois to teach her son how to read. And of course, they weren't having a lot of success at school. So what did she do? Well, she found that Nicholas could rhyme. And that's not unusual. Most children have the gift of rhyme. They could see that rhyming in words, and they could also see the patterns in poetry, right? So what she did was she taught Nicholas how to read through poetry. First, she began to find poetry online. Then she wrote poetry. Then Nicholas wrote poetry. Then Nicholas, and on and on. And he would practice that poetry till he could read it well, and then perform it for her and her husband there. Now, I'll notice that if you're interested in a quick review of Lois's work, it's on YouTube. It's called The Dyslexia Story. But what happened? Well, Nicholas did learn to read, and as we all know, learning to read opens up the entire world for you. You see, just 2 years ago, Nicholas Letchford graduated with a doctoral degree in mathematics from Oxford University in England. That's what reading does for you. And imagine if he had not learned how to read, and that would have been impossible. He was a bright kid, but for some reason, this happens for so many of our kids. Breaking through that barrier into reading can be such a challenge there. If you'd like to learn more, a friend of mine who's a principal here, his name is uh, 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 Evan Robb. He has a blog. It's called The Robb Review, and all you have to do is search for it. Lois and I wrote a blog entry for him, and it's dated January of 2024. So if you're interested in finding that, perhaps, Minda, you can find it and send it out to everybody if you'd like here. So let's get serious here. And I am serious. We need to, and Sam is too, when you talk about using song and poetry. But the one thing I want to share with you is that here in the United States, our reading scores are at a new low. This came out just last year, January 2025. And I'd like to actually share with you what we're looking at. This is what we call the NAEP, N-A-E-P. That's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And you'll notice that in 1992, go all the way to the left, the average score for our fourth graders was 217. Now, fast forward to 2024, when they did this test most recently, it's up to 15. We've actually lost 2 points, right? This is during the time we're in the science of reading period where we should be seeing scores go up, but they actually have gone down. But that's not the best, that's not the worst. Take a look at these kids. These are the lowest achievers, the kids that we worry the most about. They started 20, 30 years ago at 170. Okay, now look where they're at. They have actually lost 12 points. They've lost, where average readers have lost two, these guys have lost 6 times that amount of. So these are the children we worry about. They're the ones I am with you, Minda, Sam, all of you. We worry the most about. What can we do here? Well, that begs the question: why do so many children struggle in reading? And one answer here in the United States has been phonics. Emily Hanford, she's a well-known journalist here. Probably many of you have heard of her work. She has written about, the importance of teaching phonics in a very systematic, disciplined way. And you notice that one blog entry on the left, Hard Words, Why Aren't Kids Being Taught to Read? I kind of resent that title because kids are being taught to read, but we can always do it better right here. Now, how do we teach? And this is my model of reading. Minda sent you out a handout yesterday, I believe, and this is the first page in the handout. And of reading has phonics and book spelling and vocabulary right there at the foundation. So really, I have no problem with the program here. And you'll notice in this model of reading done by Nell Nuke and Kelly Cartwright a few years ago, you notice the yellow arrow pointing to word recognition. And notice the effect size there, 0.44. Effect size is a statistical estimate of the impact of instruction in that area in terms of phonics or word recognition. And that's pretty sizable, pretty significant here. So even our researchers, our science of reading folks are telling us, yes, we need to teach phonics. But then there's another question that comes out. What is there a best way to teach phonics and spelling and vocabulary? And the answer is no. There's no one specific way. It depends on the teacher, the kids. We have to find our own way. And I'd like to share with you one way that is based on this idea of games. This is an Edutopia article came out a while back. Does our natural affinity for games have a place in our classrooms? And of course, the answer there was yes. But think about it as adults. How many of us, when we get together with our friends and family, and we get out a game, and how many times are those games word games, whether it's Scrabble or Balderdash or Boggle or Taboo or whatever it is? We like to play these games, don't we? And if we like them, why wouldn't kids? And one other thing I'd like to mention. Those of you who play word games regularly, it might be Wordle or Words with Friends, do you ever notice you get better at it when you do it regularly? Well, we have a special name for it when you get better at it. It's called learning, right? And certainly that's what we want our kids to do here. So here's one my wife and I do every day. It's in our local newspaper. They give us a word like jasmine, and we set our kitchen timer for 10 minutes, and we try to make as many words as we can out of the letters in jasmine. And so here's mine from a way back. Mine, Jane, Sane, Maine, and so on. We count the number of words we make, and whoever loses does the dishes that night. And I have to tell you, my wife's pretty good at this, and I do my fair share of the dishes here. But again, we just want to reemphasize that notion that this is something we do as people, as human beings. Well, I'd like to tell you about word letters. I know we talked about this a little bit last week, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about it. Some people call them word chains. It all started with an article that came out in a journal called Scientific Studies in Reading, focusing attention on decoding for children with poor reading skills, design a preliminary test of the word of a word building intervention. Now, that's quite a mouthful here, but let me show with you what they did. They were working with first graders who were struggling in reading and spelling, and here's what they did. Imagine yourself working with five or six first graders who are struggling. Each of them have these five letters in front of them, like Scrabble tiles, and say, class, that word is past. Say it with me, past. Spell it, P-A-S-T. What's the word? Past. Okay, now what I want you to do is take one letter away from past and make the word pat. What sound do you hear in past that is not in pat? It's the S, so take it out. Now you got pat. Now change a letter in pat and go from pat to pot, something you might boil water in. And of course, the sound changes in the middle, so you take out the A, put in the O. So you notice what we're doing here. We're adding, subtracting, changing one letter or two letters at a time. And the entire lesson is right there, 6 words that we make from past to stop by moving one letter at a time. That's what it looks like. Now, here's what they found doing this on a regular basis over the course of 3 or 4 months. They compared kids doing this with another group of kids who were an alternative intervention. And what they found was the children who were given these word ladders or word building showed greater improvement in standardized tests of phonological awareness, word decoding, which we'd expect, right? But one other thing, comprehension. If you can decode the words, you're much more likely to understand the text that you're reading here. Well, what I did was I became an artist. Now, here's the notion of being artful, being creative. I took this idea and I created these things called word ladders. And I'd like to share with you one of my favorites with you, let's give it a go, shall we? In fact, if you got a pencil and paper, you might want to jot these down as we go through this. Start with the word planet, a celestial object in the sky here. Now, take away one letter from planet to make a vehicle that flies in the sky. That would be a plane. Okay, take away another letter from plane and make what teachers do every day. They have to prepare or plan. Excellent. Take the word plan, take away another letter, and make something kitchen utensil that you would fry fish in. That would be a frying pan. Change the vowel in pan to make a small metal object that holds two pieces of cloth together. That would be a pin. Okay, great. You're doing super. Change a letter in pin to make a religious term for a bad deed. That would be a sin. Okay. Change a letter in sin to make a kind of drink. Now, whenever I've done this in the past, it always turns up as gin. But no, that's not the answer. The answer is sip, a small drink. Okay, so make sure if you do this with your students, you make sure it's a sip and not a gin and tonic. Okay, okay. Take the word sip and change a letter and make what you're doing in your chair right now. You sit. Change a letter in sit to make what a ball player does with a bat. I'm not sure how popular baseball is in South Africa, but we use our bats to make a hit. Change a letter in hit to make something you wear on your head when it's raining. That would be a hat. Now add a letter to hat to make something that your furnace needs to produce when the weather is cold outside. You need more heat. Excellent. I think you have a lot of that in South Africa, don't you? Add a letter to heat to make something my cardiologist checks on me every year. That would be my heart. Add a letter to heart to make a fancy fireplace. That would be a hearth. Okay, now I'm going to spend a minute or two and talk about that one because a lot of our kids don't know what a hearth is. And so I want to make sure that they have that understanding. And our last word is this: take away one letter from hearth to make a word that goes with our first letter, planet, first word, planet. And of course, that would be earth. We just celebrated Earth Day last month, a few weeks ago. And this is the one I use with some students there. So what I try to do to make this kind of a game like is make the first and last words go together. Now, you don't have to. But it's something I challenge myself with. And it's not really that hard to do here. There's another one. We start with the word pump at the bottom and then work our way up to kin, another word for family. You put them together, you pumpkin. We have a lot of those around Halloween, right? As such here. So I'm going to give you guys about a minute. I know we're going to be running short of time here, but what I'd like for you to do is start with the word first and go to the word last. Okay. And I know you can do it quite easily. So I'm going to give you about a minute or so to do it on your own here. What letters would you subtract or add or change to go from first to last? And I'll give you my take on it in 30 seconds. Okay. Again, I'm going to be pushing you a little bit just because of the time, but this is what I came up with. All you have to do is take one letter away from first to make fist, change a letter in fist to make fast, and change a letter in fast to make last, first to last. Here's the problem, though. If you're going to make this into a real lesson for kids, you need some more words to add to that. I usually say 8 to 10 words. So here's what I did. I added in fit, hit, pit, pat, and past. And now I really have a real lesson that I can do with my students there. This took me about 5 minutes to do. Now I do this a lot, but I guarantee you can make these on your own. They're not that hard to do. In fact, I'll share with you that children themselves can be doing them themselves as well. But again, if you're interested in these books, they're very inexpensive. They're sold by Scholastic, and I'm sure Scholastic has a presence in South Africa. But this is the one for beginning readers, focuses on phonics there. And then they go up the ladder all the way up to like sixth grade here. But I wanted to share this one with you. I gave a talk in West Virginia not long ago, and some of the teachers didn't believe that these actually worked. And Michelle Redmond, who was a kindergarten teacher, ended up writing back to me. And she said, these are huge. It's a huge success. Children love doing these because they're fun, but at the same time, they're learning how letters and sounds work to make words. And of course, that's the foundation for reading. This is the one I put in the handout. If you'd like to try it, you certainly have my permission to do so. It starts with the word ship at the bottom and it works its way up to a group of ships, which is a fleet there. And, please feel free to try. I actually shared this once with a group of teachers, and one of them said, you know what? This is like a crossword puzzle for kids. And I had to agree. You got the clues, the number of letters are interlocked with each other. Well, somebody else in this group that I was talking to raised their hand and said, Rasinski, she's right. This is like a crossword puzzle. And something else. I don't know anybody who likes to do crosswords who doesn't have a large vocabulary, is not a good reader, is not a good speller. And boy, that truly is. If any of you are into word games such as crossword puzzles, my money would go on you if we were to do a vocabulary test here. But it doesn't matter if kids do it on paper, dry erase boards. You can see the smiles on their face. Here's a teacher actually made a ladder, an actual ladder for her classroom to do these in. My favorite way of doing it, though, is having kids actually use letter tiles, as you can see here, and sliding the letters around. And then once they do that, once they make each word, then they write it out. I think that gives them a chance to manipulate the letters, and at the same time, we know the importance of actually writing words out to get them into your memory here. So what I wanted to mention to you is I mentioned this earlier, every Wednesday during the school year, and I'll be doing this for another 2 weeks until our summer starts. But I'll be sending this out, a Wednesday word letter. And all you need to do to get this is send me an email, trasinski@kent.edu. In fact, when we're through this morning, well, for me, this morning, I'm going to be sending out my Word Ladder Wednesday. So if you'd like to get this week's, drop me an email when you get a chance here. And I just want to mention this one person, Paul Wilson. He was the assistant director for the Center for the Study of Reading a number of years back, our major research institution here in the States for reading. He is now retired and he tutors children, and he's on my resource list. And he ended up writing to me a couple of months ago. He said, "Thanks for your word letters, Tim. I love the activities. They motivate kids and parents to dig into the internal structure of words." And you know what? We have a special name for that. We call it orthographic mapping. If you're familiar with the work now I can remember his name, David, oh golly, well, Linnea Airy, and I'll remember his name as soon as we're done here. But they talk about this. To really learn a word, you have to map it internally. And that's what we're doing with these sorts of things. But here's what I want to share with you. You know, they're not that hard to make. And you can get to the point where kids can do these things on your own. That's really what we should be heading for, getting kids to do this on their own. So here's a student who went from pirate to ship there. And it might look a little sloppy, but think of, what he had to do to actually make this. Here's another one. This student went from fish to shark, top to bottom. And again, it may look sloppy, but what he had to do to think of changing the letters, the orthography, he had to come up with the clues. Notice the stars next to some of the clues. Those are the challenge words. He even had that metacognitive ability to think about what are the really hard ones kids will have trouble with. You're onto something when kids do this. Jackie Clevin is a second grade teacher here in Illinois, and she wrote to me not long ago about how she's never witnessed the progress kids made when they're doing these kinds of activities. So I'm not telling you that these word ladders are the answer to everything, but I think would be a great supplement to whatever you might be doing to your own program. They only take minutes to do, but they're engaging, they're science-based, and kids are actually learning. Again, going back to my Word Ladder Wednesday, on Valentine's Day, this is the one I sent. I try to send you a student sheet and then a teacher sheet. And this one has 3 keywords in it: be my Valentine. So that's what I sent out back in February. And then on Friday, I'll send you a poem or a song for building fluency. And I try to make them related. So this is the one that went out around Valentine's Day. I Love You. A poem by the way, by David Harrison, who you'll be hearing from also later in this series of sessions here. Pizza pie, pizza to pie. Last week was pizza pie, pizza party week here. And then I send out poetry about pizzas, right? So you can connect the two with your students. So in answer to our question, why do children struggle in reading? Phonics is important, but it's not enough. Phonics alone is not going to get you to where you need to go. It's not going to cross that bridge to comprehension. Adding more phonics only yields short-term reading gains on reading tests, according to Natalie Wexler. By the time kids get into 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, it's vocabulary, it's fluency, it's other things that matter. Again, take a look at this model of reading that I shared with you. Again, word recognition, effect size 0.44. Now look at the bridging process, and that's what I call fluency, the bridge to comprehension. Notice the effect size there, 0.70, almost 1.5 times greater the impact than the impact from word recognition. So what's inside these bridging processes? Well, fluency, what we're going to talk about next here. And again, please forgive me. I know we talked about this last week, but again, I like to kind of, sometimes we have to hear something more than once to really anchor it into our breads, into our heads. So what to do? Well, teach fluency. Okay, but easier said than done. How do we do it? Well, first, I'm going to go back to my model of reading on page 1 in the handout and share with you this notion that it's a bridge from word recognition or word study at the top to comprehension at the bottom, the goal of reading. It's made up of these 2 sub-competencies, automaticity and prosody. And I'd like to talk about those if I might, first for a second here. Automaticity, part of fluency, is the ability to recognize words automatically or effortlessly. And the best example of that is you and me. You and I read, how often do we have to stop and sound out a word or think about the meaning to the word that we're reading? Hardly ever. Most of the words we encounter there, they're instantly recognized. And the significance of that is we can use our brain, our mental energy, to where it is needed most, to comprehension. If you have to use your brain to sound out every word, even if you read the words accurately and know what they mean, you're going to be using up some of that energy, and that energy can no longer be applied to comprehension. So we want the kids to develop automaticity there. How do we measure it? And I think many of you already know speed of reading is one way of measuring automaticity. I use the Hasbrook and Tyndall oral reading fluency data. You can find this quite easily simply by searching on Google Hasbrook and Tyndall oral fluency data. But here's you get an example of what we're talking about here. These are third graders, 8 and 9 year olds here in the States here. And I like to look at the 50th percentile because the 50th percentile is like the average, right? So come fall, so it's the beginning of the school year here in the States, we would expect third graders to be reading 71 words per minute on grade level material. By January or middle of the year, they should be up to 92. And by the end of the year, they should be up to 107 words per minute if they are normal achieving readers, right? So let's do a little bit of math here. Let's take that 107 at the end of the year and subtract from that the 71 from the beginning of the year, and we end up with 36 words correct per minute. What is that? Well, that's what we expect kids to gain. So if you happen to be a third grade teacher, over the course of the year that you have your students, you should expect your kids to gain from 36 words from when they start the year until they end the year in December. And if they do that, then you're doing your job. You're getting they're doing just what they should be in terms of automaticity. Now, one big caveat here: we don't teach this automaticity by making kids read fast. We teach them to read fast the way you and I develop speed, and that's by reading a lot, right? I don't ever remember my teachers telling me to, Tim, try to read a little faster this time. No, we just read a lot. We not only develop automaticity, and we develop automaticity, the speed comes all by itself here. But wait, as they say in those infomercials, there's more. And of course, that more is prosody. Prosody is a linguistic term for expression. If I think about somebody who's a fluent reader, it's not somebody who reads or talks fast, it's somebody who uses their voice to make meaning. They get loud and soft and fast and slow. They have dramatic pauses. And what they're doing is they're adding to their voice meaning, right? That's helping you as a listener understand what it is that they're reading. I love this quote by the poet Maya Angelou. She writes, "Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with shades of deeper meaning." Boy, that means so much more. It's not just the words; it's the way you say the words. Even when even when you read them silently, you're hearing that inner voice here. Here's my favorite example. I'm sure kids in South Africa use this word also, dude, right? It can mean different things, though. If you were to say hello to a friend using the word dude, how would it sound? Dude, dude. But if you were to express consternation and disappointment with them, well, how would it sound now? Dude. How would it sound if you were to ask a question? Dude? And how would it sound if you just won the lottery? Dude. It's the same word, right? But it has different meanings on the way you say it. And what we know I'm going to go back here for just a second. What we know is that kids who, when they read with good expression, are our best comprehenders. They're crossing that bridge to comprehension. And students who, when they read out loud, read like robots, word by word, not much expression, not much enthusiasm. They're the ones that have the most trouble with comprehension. So we want to develop both of those things, automaticity and prosody. And the main way of doing that is through practice. How do you develop fluency in anything? You practice it enough, it becomes second nature. But I want to talk about the two kinds of practice here. The first is wide reading, and I mentioned that earlier. We want kids to read as much as possible, and I mentioned the study by Richard Allington and Miguel Franson. The more kids read, the better they get. And that's a challenge in and of itself here. How can we do that? But we can, do whatever we can to encourage it. And wide reading is supposed to work like this. I'm oversimplifying it, but you read passage A, that makes you a slightly better, and that moves you on to B, and that makes you a better reader, and so on and so forth, one reading after another. But we all know that it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it works like that. And if you're working with struggling readers, you know this is true. You read passage A and, well, maybe you improve a little bit, but not as much as you need to. But now you have to move on to B and you read it once and, well, you actually did worse on that one. You're just kind of bouncing around the bottom, right? You only read the text once, and that's not enough. And so for these kids, we got to say, guys, you know what? We need to read it more than once. We call it repeated reading or deep reading. Not we need to do wide reading for sure, but we also need to do this deeper repeated reading. That's where you ask kids to say, ask our children, we didn't read that text very well the first time through. So let's try it a second or third time. Let's see what happens. And this is what, it's Dr. J. Samuels wrote this, seminal study years ago, 1979, the method of repeated readings. And I'd like to share with you what the research has told us over the last 50 years on repeated readings. Let's take passage A again. We'll have student read passage A once, twice, three times. And as you can tell, with every reading, they got better, which you'd expect, right? You read something multiple times, but it's what happens next. Now, keep in mind, passage B is more challenging than passage A. So normally we should expect that first reading to go downhill. But look what happens. That first reading of B is better than the first reading of A. How can that be? B is harder than A. Well, the only thing they did between A and B was they practiced reading A a couple times. What happened? Well, they developed automaticity, they developed prosody, and of course, that's feeling of success that is so important for our readers. Well, to make a long story short, we practice B several times, and then we move on to C. And again, what do we see? Improvement there. C is more difficult than B. So what we're doing is, with every new text, we're showing improvement. And we couldn't call this science right now. This has been shown by over 50 studies on repeated reading. The problem is, how do you act? Oh, well, again, let me just share with you the effect size on this. 1.68. Remember, I shared with you earlier, the effect size for phonics was 0.4. The effect size for fluency in general was 0.78. Look at this repeated reading, 0.1, 0.6, double what we would normally expect here. So this really is huge, even if we're talking about secondary students here. But the problem is this: how do we get kids to engage in repeated readings? And, that's where art comes in. The answer to me has been performance. Have you ever been in a play or sung a song for an audience or recited a poem? I bet you rehearsed. And if you didn't, I bet you wish you had. What do you think I was doing an hour before I started my presentation with you? I was practicing this talk. Why? Because I would like to do as good a job as possible here. Well, are there texts that are meant to be performed? And now we go all the way back to the beginning of our session here. Poetry, song lyrics, dialogues, monologues, readers' theater scripts, and so on. These are all texts that are meant to be read out loud, meant to be performed. And if they're meant to be performed, you have to rehearse it. And a rehearsal is just another form of repeated reading here. So we just love this idea of readers' theater. Now, for us, readers' theater, we often think, originally, I thought of it as a script where kids would do a little play and practice and perform it. But it could be a poem, it could be a song, it could be anything that's meant to be read out loud. The key to it is, though, in readers' theater, there's no expectation for memorization. Children have a text, they read, they practice it, and when they perform it, they're still reading it. There's no expectation for memorization. They can if they want to, but we want them more to read with expression than anything. So here's some examples of kids that we've worked with in the past, some a little bit older kids, and notice they're performing for their classmates, but notice they're reading. But they've read these scripts and poems many times before. And you can just see the confidence in these kids. One of the things we tell kids when you perform is you got to stand straight up. And one of the things I've often noticed with kids who struggle in reading, when they're asked to read out loud and stand up, they're often slouched over or leaning against the wall. They don't have that confidence. This is our reading clinic at our university, and you'll notice every one of those charts is a poem or a song that the kids learn every single day. That's the goal, is to learn to read something well. And how do we do it? We do it by repeated reading. Now, so where do you find these kinds of text? Well, I'll just start by saying you can find online one of my favorite places to find poetry is poetryforkids.com. I've written there at the bottom right-hand corner. This is Ken Nesbitt's. He's a children's poet, and he posts them for free on his website, poetryforkids.com. So make sure you jot that down, or keep it in mind if you go back to the recording of this. So, for example, a few months ago we had a snow day here. So I searched snow day, and look what popped up. A poem that is perfect for if not that day, but the next day the kids are actually in school. We just started spring not long ago here in the Northern Hemisphere, and so I searched for a song about spring and or a poem about spring. So that's a great place to start. I know this fluency development lesson, David Harrison, who I mentioned earlier, also one of our great poets, has written over 100 poems that are in this book here. So if you guys end up getting that, you'll have a good resource there. But what I'd like to talk about is this idea that you can write your own poetry, and your students can do exactly the same, write their own scripts. And I'd like to give you a couple of examples. One of the easiest ways to write your own poem is to write what I call um, a version of a poem, a parody, if you will. So many of us know this nursery rhyme: diddle diddle dumpling, my son John went to bed with his stockings on. One shoe off, one shoe on. Diddle diddle dumpling, my son John. Okay, we all know that. Hopefully, our kids know it as well. But here's what I did. What I try to do is I say this is a great poem for teaching that word family, on, right? All those on words there. But how about if I want to work on at? Well, I took the same poem and I just changed it around a little bit. Diddle daddle dumpling, my son Pat had a shaggy dog and a mighty fat cat. The cat was a bother, so he told him to scat. Diddle daddle dumpling, my son Pat. It's not the best poem in the world, but you know what? Kids love it. There. Ann. Now we have Diddle Daddle Dumpling, Hannah and Stan. They had a dog and his name was Dan. Dan had fur that was brown and tan. Diddle Daddle Dumpling, Pan and Stan. These take me about 2 minutes to write. You do them regularly, and you can do them on your own here. So any poem, whether it's Jack or Jill or whatever it might be, or song lyric too, you can write your own version of it. That's one of the easiest ways to write a poem here. And here's another example also. Here in the States, Walt Whitman is one of our honored poets. But here's a teacher who turned this into a Reader's Theater script, a poem. What did she do? She broke it up into parts and had each part assigned to a different student. So she didn't even have to write the script. All she had to break it up into parts here. Here in where I live in Ohio, which part of the U.S., Jesse Owens is one of our great heroes, the Olympic hero. And again, here's one done by a teacher. She did this by not a poem, but her and her students did a little research into Jesse Owens and then wrote it up as a script for them to practice and perform here. I don't know why I'm sharing this with you over and over again, but a teacher friend of mine from North Carolina teaches science with Reader's Theater, magnetism. She writes poetry and then breaks it up into parts. And now the kids are learning, doing things. They're learning about magnetism. They're developing fluency all at the same time here. One of the things I like to do is write Reader's Theater scripts from American history. And here in America, the Gettysburg Address is one of our most sacred speeches given by President Lincoln. Well, I was working with some fifth and sixth graders, and we want kids to learn this. So what we did was we did some research into this speech given by Lincoln during the American Civil War. And then I guided them to write this up as a script. You actually have this in the handout packet, pages 5 through 9. And we wrote it up into parts. And then we ended, if you look at it, we ended with the actual Gettysburg Address speech. 4 scores and 7 years ago. That's famous one by Lincoln here. So these are not that hard to do. And it's a great way of getting students into content. South African history, you could take events from South African history, write it up as a Reader's Theater script, and you're getting a twofer. You're learning content and you're developing fluency at the same time. Students themselves can become poets and authors and script writers here. Here's two boys from our reading clinic. They had been reading poetry for two voices. And so they wrote this one. You can't see it very well on the screen there, but it's a poetry about sea life for two voices. Remember the Diddle Diddle Dumpling poems? Well, here's one of our students in our reading clinic. He wrote Something Under My Bed. Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred, slept all day on his bed, woke up at midnight, screamed, there's a monster under my bed. Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred. Now, if I could, I'd like to tell you a little something about Taylor. He was one of our kids, came to our reading clinic. He finished second grade, pretty much a non-reader. And our reading clinic at the university runs during the vacation months. And that was the last thing he wanted to come and more reading instruction. I still remember him hanging on to his mother, that first day. Well, we call our reading clinic Camp Read a lot. We try to make it as fun and camp-like as possible. And one of the things we do is we a lot with poetry. And not only do we read poetry, kids eventually write it. So he ended up writing this poem and he ended up performing it on our last day. We have a reading celebration, and the kids perform what they have done, either individually with partners or in a small group, readers theater and such. He performed this for his mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and siblings and classmates, and he got a standing ovation. But what happened was this, this was really a life-changing event for Taylor. We had a little punch and cookies reception afterwards. And what he did was, I was talking to a parent, and he comes up to me and he starts tapping me on the shoulder, Mr. Rasinski, Mr. Rasinski, Mr. Rasinski. And he almost started yelling at me. He said, okay, Taylor, what do you want? And he says, can we keep doing Camp Read a lot? This was a kid who's 5 weeks earlier wanted nothing to do with reading. And now when we make it authentic, artful, and scientific at the same time, he can't get enough of it. That's our challenge as teachers, is becoming artful and scientific here. On page 4 and 5 in the handout, here in the States, this coming Monday is what we call Memorial Day, where we honor all the soldiers who have died in service to their country. And this is a poem actually written by a Canadian. Many of you, I'm sure, might be familiar with it. In Flanders Field, the poppies blow beneath his crosses, row on row. But how can we do this? You can use this just by itself for your students to learn and perform. It'd be a great text. But you can also turn it into a script by breaking it up into parts. So on page 5 in the handout, you'll have another version of the same thing. But all I did was I broke it up by line. So one group of kids reads the left side, one group of kids reads the right column, and now you have a script there. That's how easy it is to create scripts, and you can go into more and more detail here. Now, what you're looking at there is my family. I have 4 children, and they have their families. They live in different parts of the country. So every Sunday we get together. We have a little family Zoom call like you and I are doing right now. And what I do, we have a couple of youngsters there. Bottom right-hand corner, you notice Carter. At the time, he was a first grader there. What I do is I find a text from Poetry for Kids, and I'll print it out. And then what I do is I assign parts, members of our family, and I'll send this out the morning of Sunday morning, and I'll say, okay, everybody practice, and come when we get together that evening for our Zoom call, we'll have a little performance. And of course, Carter, he gets to be the star of the family, reading his part there. So easy to do and so much fun to do. How about writing actual scripts? Here's a love story written by 2 girls uh, in the first grade. Hi, I'm Beth. Hi, I'm Katie. Do you love me? No. Okay, then I'm glad you understand. Do you remember doing this as a child? I do. And I remember getting into trouble for it. We should be encouraging kids to do this sort of thing here. But almost any story can be turned into a script. Frog and Toad is such a great piece. There, it's mostly conversation. It's mostly, dialogue. So have your students, in this case, this was Ethan and Matthew from our reading clinic. They just broke up the dialogue into parts. And now you have a Reader's Theater script there. So what they're doing is they're, number one, they're, of course, learning Frog and Toad, but also they're learning how to write, from, emulating one of our great children's writers here. Or how about Miss Nelson is Missing, another one of our great children's books. Break it up into parts, mainly because these picture books for kids are broken up to parts that are mostly dialogues there. Or for those who are working with older kids, take a little segment of a story for older kids and break it up into parts here as well. This is the fourth graders, I believe, from The Incredible Shrinking Machine by Seymour Simon here. Here's my all-time favorite I'll share with you. And I know I'm running a little late on time. I hope you can stay with me another 10 or 15 minutes here. But The Paper Bag Princess, many of you might know this, by Robert Munsch, great author. It's one of those reverse fairy tales. It's about Elizabeth, who was a beautiful princess, she lived in a castle. She had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. But then what happened was a dragon came along and burned everything up, took away Prince Ronald. So what she had to do was, first of all, she had to get a paper bag to cover herself up with, and then she had to go find her boyfriend and save him. Well, spoiler alert, it doesn't end well, but you'll have to read it on your own here. But we were working with third graders in our reading clinic. Now, third graders, um, what would that be, 9 and 10-year-olds who are struggling here. They have been doing readers theater. Finally, we said, you write it your own, write your own. And we gave them that book, and this is what they wrote. What I want to share with you is the part that's underlined and bolded. That's not in the original text. They added it. So they knew that fairy tales began with once upon a time, so they put it in there, even though the author did not. And there's not a lot of dialogue, so they had to add dialogue. Notice what they have Elizabeth saying, this is a Gucci blouse, and the prince, tennis, anyone? They went right along with the pictures that were there. So what these kids are doing, and I would argue, is they're making inferences. They're making guesses about what these characters are saying. And you know what that is? That's comprehension. They're understanding. First of all, they're developing fluency, but they're understanding how the meaning of the text. They're developing their writing skills based on Robert Munch and so on. This is like the whole your entire curriculum could be based on readers theater script. Here's one other book I'll share with you here. It's called I Am the Dog, I Am the Cat by Donald Hall. Now, Donald Hall is a poet for adults, but he wrote this book for kids here. And here's how it goes. It starts with a dog and a cat. They live in the same household. Can you imagine? I got this book because kids were, I thought it was a natural reader's theater script. One of our students is the dog. I'm the dog. I like bones. I like to bury bones. As for eating, I can take it or leave it. And then we have the cat, Mr. Attitude. I am the cat. I don't care whether they feed me or not, as long as I get fed. And then it goes into how these two animals see the same thing in their family, in their households, whether it's the baby, the UPS driver, whatever it might be. So basically, it's a reader's theater script. And it's so much fun to have kids perform, and they just love it. But you know what else they love? They love writing their own. What this book is about is compare and contrast, and that's a comprehension skill. We often talk about text to text. How is this story like another story? How is this story like something that happened in real life, and so on? Well, you can use this book to teach compare and contrast. Instead of I am the dog, I am the cat, how about I am the lizard, I am the frog? These are two second graders who had been studying amphibians and reptiles. And at the end of a week of study, the teacher said, do something creative, be an artist. So they took I am the dog, I am the cat, but they transferred it into I am the lizard, I am the frog. And they did the research into the content, they wrote it up, and then they practiced and performed it. They were the stars of their class, and their classmates actually learned something as a result. Isn't that cool when that happens? Or these are two older kids. These were kids in the like fifth grade. They were learning metamorphosis. They did the same thing, except they did it without all the illustrations and such. I am a butterfly. I am a moth. Some people think we're the same, but we're not here. So these are all examples of these kind of books that could be made from I am the dog, I am the cat. I have a pile of those books written by kids, maybe that high. I am Harry Potter. I am Maniac McGee. I'm a deciduous tree. I'm a coniferous tree. I'm a cumulus cloud. I'm a nimbus cloud. I'm a Democrat. I'm a Republican. And of course, the last one there, I am Pretoria. I am Johannesburg. A little South Africa touch to that as well here. But anything you might want to compare and contrast. This is your book. Yeah, there. And I'll share with you one more thing, and then we're going to finish with one last thing here. There's a website I really want to mention to you. It's called thebestclass.org. Either take a picture of it, or I noticed Minda's writing it down, so she'll give it to you. It's the website for Dr. Chase Young. He's a good friend of both Sam and I, and he was a second grade teacher. He's now a college professor. What? Okay. He's now a professor. But when he was teaching second grade, you know how he taught reading? Reader's theater. What they would do with his classes, he would read students a trade book. And then they would work together to turn that trade story into a reader's theater script. And then the kids would practice it and then perform it. So, they're reading good literature, they're learning to write, they're practicing, they're performing. And you notice that big circle there I have at the bottom of my slide here, that he has a list of about 150 reader's theater scripts that him he and his second graders wrote over the course of the many years that he taught there. So, for example, the Polar Express. This is one that many of us around the world teach our kids, read to our kids around, the Christmas time. Well, what you're looking at there is a script written by second graders in McKinney, Texas. And what I love about this is that you can say to your students, these are kids in America. They're doing our kids here in South Africa. We can do exactly the same thing, because basically what you're doing is you're taking the actual text and you're rewriting it in a form that's performed as a script itself here. Again, I'll mention to you that if you're on my resource list every Friday, I send out resources for free. So a few weeks ago at the beginning of spring, I wrote the Ode to Spring. Nothing terribly long, but fun to do. With Memorial Day coming up, there's a poem written by David Harrison, I mentioned earlier. Thank you for all our servicemen and women. March 17th is St. Patrick's Day, so we send out a Irish blessing. You always got to do that one, and so on. So again, I do that every Friday, Fluency Friday here. So this is the routine that we follow for performance. If you wanted to do it in a over the course of a week, Monday, whatever text it might be, you model it. You read it to your students so they get a sense for it. Tuesday, read it chorally together with the teacher, so you're helping your kids out. Wednesday, you have your kids practice in small groups. Thursday, you have a dress rehearsal. Let's practice what we're going to do on Friday. And then on Friday is a grand performance where you dim the lights, you bring out a bar stool and you have the kids perform, the two or three or poems that are songs that they learned that week here. What a grand way to end each week here. And this is what I mentioned earlier. My friend Becky Awasaki did with her first graders. Every Friday was that grad performance. And as you remember, every one of our students was reading on grade level. And the research tells us that. Again, I plan more than what I should have, but please, if you have to leave, go ahead. But please stay with me. At the very least, we'll record this here. Lorraine Griffith, a fourth grade teacher, found doing this kind of routine, her kids made over 2 years progress in reading. In the 1 year they were in her classroom. Another study looked at what they call the Poetry Academy, where children were after school program where children were paired with grandparent volunteers, and they were learning poetry, and then they would perform their poetry for their classmates. Again, what they found, significant improvements in word recognition, fluency, comprehension, and attitude. So it's not just fluency. Fluency is the bridge to comprehension. In fact, Nell Duke wrote about this once. She talked about reader's theater. And you notice that she said reader's theater can build fluency, but also comprehension. It's the bridge to comprehension. So we're not just working on fluency and word recognition here. Again, one last thing here. This was a review study, a study that looked at a number of studies. And again, what they found was Reader's Theater showed a large improvement, large effect size in terms of students' reading skills, but also attitudes toward reading here, and of course, that is so important too. So these are basic tools for teaching fluency: modeling fluent reading, reading to kids, assisted reading, where kids read something, they hear you read to it, the two kinds of practice, and phrasing. What would happen if we put those together? We'd end up with the fluency development lesson. And again, I know I'm repeating what we covered last week, but I have this little simulation that I'd like to try with you. I've done it before and it works out really well. So hang on with me for 10 more minutes here. Synergy means putting all those things together into a lesson, meaning you get something greater than the sum of the parts. So on page 10 in the handout is the actual fluency development lesson, the plan itself. And let's walk through it very quickly with you. First of all, you find a daily text, 100 words, 200 words, not terribly long. It's something you want your kids to learn to read either that day or over the course of a week. Poetry works remarkably well. You make enough copies for every student, okay? Actually, you make 2 copies, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Then what do? Well, here's an example. We had Mother's Day here in the United States last week, and so this was the one that we used for Mother's Day. My Mother Drives Me Everywhere, another poem by Kid Nesbitt there. And again, here's an example from our reading clinic here. Okay, so every student has 2 copies of that Mother's Day poem. What do? Well, we start by I read it to you 2 or 3 times to model it. Okay, that's the modeling part. And then we talk about the content and how I read it. And then let's read it together. That's the assisted reading. Okay, let's chorally read it a couple, 3 times. And then I've assigned my students to groups of 2 or 3, and I say, practice on your own 2 or 3 more times. Now, this can be done over a week, and it can be done in one day, or it can be done in 2 or 3 days. That's kind of up to you here. But then while the students are practicing another 2 or 3 readings, I go around and give them encouragement and feedback. And now we've just read this Mother's Day poem anywhere from 6 to 9 times. So the kids can read it pretty well. So how are you going to get them to do all this practice? And that's performance. Okay, who wants to read, our Mother's Day poem? And every hand will go up. Why? Because they can read it well. So, and this is where you have to be careful in our reading clinic, we have a parent or two sitting outside, and we would send 2 or 3 kids out at a time, and they would perform for that poem for that parent, and then they would, get a hug and a sticker and be sent back into the classroom there because if you have every kid perform, if you have 25 kids, that's going to take a long time, and time is always precious. And then after the performance, we have the kids engage in some word study. So we'll choose 3 or 4 words from that poem and we'll do some word activities, whether a word sword or word ladder or something like that. And that's the end of the lesson. No, not quite. If you remember, I gave you 2 copies of the poem. One copy goes in your poetry folder, and every Friday we're going to have a poetry party, poetry slam. The other copy goes home, and it may never ever come back. One of the best things parents can do to help their children become better readers is simply to listen to them read. So the idea is take this poem home and read to your mom and dad, or brother and sister, and grandma and grandpa, and whoever it might be, and read as many times as they would like. There, we call that the Lucky Listener Club. Whoever listens to you read your poem at home, they sign the back of their poem, and maybe with a comment or two. And whoever comes to class the next day with the most signatures, they get a special, assignment. Maybe they get to be the word wizard for the day or something like that. So here's an example of one of our students in our reading clinic. You may notice Chloe is the family dog. In this case, this student read twice to her dog. Dogs are great listeners. Cats, not so much. I'm not so sure, but dogs for sure here. And then the idea is to do this, if you can do this every day, do it 3 to 5 times a week. Now, if you can't do it 3 to 5 times, spread this out over a week. There's many ways that you can do this here, but the key is to do it regularly with your students. And I'll share with you the research, but we are now going to give it a try here. Okay, so here's the simulation. If you happen to have the handout with you, it's on page 11. It's a poem called Chappawacky. It's a version of Jabberwocky. Many of you might remember that from your high school days. Except this one was written by somebody who put in hard words to read. The words are actually from culinary Indian words there. So what we're going to do is this here. I am going to ask you to read this to yourself here, okay, in your best voice for 30 seconds, just the interest of time. Begin with the word twas. Okay, when I say start, and read all the way till I call time. Now, if you have just the sheet with you, it actually is more than that. If you don't have the sheet with you, just read off the screen here for 30 seconds. If you come to the end of the poem, the word thought, go back to the beginning and continue reading for 30 seconds, okay? Now, are you guys ready? I want your best reading, not your fastest reading. So here we go. Start with the word twas. On your mark, get set, go. Stop. That was 30 seconds. Now, what I want you to do is count the number of words you read. Okay, those numbers there to the right are the number of words at the end of each verse. So count the number of words you read. And what I want you to do then is to multiply that number by 2. You notice there in the bottom right-hand corner. What I'd like to get is 60 seconds worth of your reading. So take your number, multiply it by 2, jot it down somewhere. Okay? So if you read, say, 42 words in that 30 seconds, multiply it by 2, your number would be 84. Okay, you didn't know this was going to be a math workshop, did you? All right. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to do Jabberwocky as our lesson. We're going to do it very quickly here, but and we're going to see how this improves your reading of Jabberwocky. So this is on page 12 if you want to follow along with me. Notice the little slash marks in here. Oftentimes with kids who read word by word, I will put in these slash marks to help them try to read in chunks there. So a single slash for a short pause, a double slash for a longer pause. Okay, so here's step one. I read it. You guys follow along with me. Here we go. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome-raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the man's own folk he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while and thought. All right. How'd I do? I thought I did pretty well there. I've been practicing it all day yesterday and today here. Um, and then we talk about it. How did I read? Did I do it okay? I might read a second time and maybe not read it fluently, maybe like a robot. 'Twas really again the slightly toasted gyre and gimble in the way. So I'll read it two or three times, ask you to follow along. We'll talk about it. Now, step two is now we're going to read it together, correlate. Okay, so this time I'd like for you guys to read with me. And again, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, because when we hear everybody reading together, it gets a little jumbled. But you guys with me, okay? Here we go. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome-raths outgrabe. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the man's own foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while and thought. Okay, great job, everyone. Here, and then I might say, okay, now all the boys read it, then all the girls read it together. Different ways of creating some variety. Step number three is now you're on your own. So I'm going to ask you to read these three verses of Jabberwocky on your own. So go ahead and read it yourself right now. Do your best reading. I'm going to be quiet. Go ahead, read. Good. I like your facial expressions, Minda. uh, I would have loved to have heard you read, but excellent job, everybody. Okay, now after practicing on your own, do you think you can perform it for an audience? And I would like to see everybody's hand raised. At this point, you should be able to read this because you've practiced it several times there. So we have a performance. Of course, we're not going to do it today because we're running out of time here. But I think all of you would feel fairly reasonably comfortable to perform. Now, when you perform, make sure that your students read, not that they have try to memorize, that they actually read here. Then our last step is the word study. What we'll do is I'll choose 3 or 4 or 5 words, or have the students do them, and we'll do various things with them. So here's an example that when I did this earlier with some students in our university, they chose shun, foe, sought and thought, sword, beware, and clause. And those are good words to learn, you know. I'll put them on display on a word wall and talk about what do they mean. You know, a shun is somebody you stay away from, you may not like. Foe is an enemy, and so on. But then we can do a variety of these things for 5 or 10 minutes. We might do some word sorts, sort them into 1 syllable and 2 syllable words. Sort them into words that have consonant blends, consonant digraphs, and the words that don't have either. Or put them in alphabetical order, beware, clause, and so on. Every time we do one of these word sorts, you're looking at the same words, but you're looking at them from a different angle. You're asking a different question of them. And that, again, is what orthographic mapping is all about. David Kilpatrick is that guy's name. I forgot about earlier, orthographic mapping here. We might do a word ladder. Okay. Remember, go back to word letters. Start with the word sword. Okay. Now a weapon. Okay. Take away a letter and make something that sentences are made with one or more with a word. Okay. Change a letter in word to make a hospital room for a number of patients. Ward. Take away a letter from war to make the opposite of peace. That would be war. Change letter in war to make the opposite of near. That would be far. Add a letter to far to make what you pay when you jump on the bus. You have to pay the fare. Okay, and we talk about the two kinds of fare, right? FAIR and FARE. Change a letter in fair to make what a golfer says when they're going to hit somebody with their golf ball. What do they yell out? Four. And finally, take away a letter from Ford to make somebody you might use a sword on. And that would be a foe, sword to foe. So again, you can do these so easily from the words that you encounter in your in the words that you choose there. And if you can't think of any, then send me a note. I'm pretty good at these. I can make a word letter for you here. Okay, now date. So that's the end of the lesson. Now, what I'll send you home with is Jabberwocky, that first part, um, without the phrase markings, so you can practice at home with mom and dad. And then day two, we'll do the same lesson again with the second part of Jabberwocky because I figured Jabberwocky was just too long to learn do one lesson with, so I broke it up into a smaller part here. Okay, now comes the big test. What I'd like for you guys to do is go back to page 11, the Chapterwocky, and I'm going to ask you to read it one more time to yourself, okay? So I'm going to be the timer again, so 30 seconds. When I say go, read it, and I'll tell you when to stop, okay? I want your best reading, not your fastest, okay? So are you ready? On your mark, get set, read. Stop. Stop. Count the number of words you read. Okay. Do that quickly. And what I want you to do is multiply that by two also. Okay. Now we have now we have one more mathematical thing to do here. Okay, so you have that post-test score, the one you just did right now. Okay, so what I want you to do is take that score you just did, and from that number subtract your first score. Okay, so if your our second reading was 132 and your first reading was 96, 132 minus 96 gives you 38. That's what we call a gain score. Okay, and if you can do that, if you wouldn't mind putting your gain score into the chat box, just put as whatever number that is, 38, 36, 29, 28, whatever it is, put it in the chat box. I'm trying to see what we got here. 20 plus 22 for Sam. Uh, Renee plus 20. Excellent. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, just the interest in the time, I'm going to stop. Melinda, how about you? What did you get? Turn your. Oh,
I I I
Mariah.
I got 28. I actually
28.
improved by
Okay, good.
28.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, let's go back to what I shared with you earlier. Uh, remember this? Grade three, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, we expect kids to make 36 words. Okay, if you made 20 or so, if your gain was 20, you made a half year's gain in 15 minutes that we did this. Melinda, you were a little bit better. You made three-quarters of yours gain. Now, there's reasons for that. Chapterwocky and Jabberwocky are very similar, but just think if we did this every day with our kids, you would see that not only this gain in terms of reading rate, but comprehension as well here. In fact, a study that I did a few years ago, I gave a talk like this to a group of teachers who live in Toledo, Ohio, not far from where I live. And a fourth grade teacher said, I'm going to try this with my students. She chose her 6 lowest achievers and for 15 minutes a day did this lesson. She started on November 12th, which is toward the middle of the school year, and ended on March 9th. And here's what she found. Normally, we'd expect kids to gain about 14 words from November to March. Okay, that's what we would expect. What did her kids do? They gained 28 words per minute in that. But of course, we're interested in comprehension. Well, normally we would expect kids to gain about 4/10 of a year from November to March. What did her students do? They gained 3 times that amount, 1.2 years growth. And keep in mind, these are struggling readers. These are kids who are making less than a year's growth for years with the school. Now they're doing this in just a matter of months here. Journal of Learning Disabilities, if you happen to working with kids who struggle, especially identified as struggling, the Journal of Learning Disabilities study said that this really does work. Not only does it build fluency, but comprehension there. In fact, I think you saw Julia Armstrong's research last week, where she found tremendous gains making from students in just 5 weeks' time. So I'd like to recommend that you guys try this there. The book is a good resource, but you don't need the book. You can find your own poetry. You can make your own poetry to do that. And just keep in mind, the goal in reading instruction is comprehension, right? But to get there, we have to cross that bridge to fluency to get to comprehension there. Well, we began with a song. I'd like to end with a poem, and it's for all of us who teach kids to read. Here's how it goes, written by a friend of mine who named Russ Walsh. Have you ever seen a child squirm, nervous and tense, struggle to make sense out of those strange squiggles on a page? Well, I have, and I should say we have. And have you ever seen a child tremble like a frightened bird, stumble on a tricky word, unable to move on? Well, we have. And have you ever seen a child frustrated day after day, fiercely push a book away, crying, I just can't read, I can't? Well, I have, and we have. And have you ever seen a child just continue with the battle, ignoring all those who prattle that she will never succeed? Well, I and we have. And have you ever seen a child look up at you with pride and smile an ocean wide, say, I can read this. Yes, I can. Well, I have, and we have. And because we have, we can face another morning of fear, frustration, and failure. For one child's reading triumph keeps the goal within our reach and reminds us why it is we teach. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for taking too much time, but I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me, and I will certainly be sure to answer. Make sure, again, if you'd like to get on my resources list, there's my email again. So if you want to drop me a line, and I'll be sending you out within an hour a word letter that you can use with your students. All right. Thanks so much,
Thank
Melinda,
you.
for having me. Sam, also.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. I think we've all learned so much, and the extra time was well worth spending. We appreciate it so much. Sam, thanks for joining us. Do you want to say one or two words before we go?
Um, just that this stuff really works and it works and the kids have fun with it. So
I love
I,
it.
that's as good as it gets. And Chase is a good
Great.
Chase has got some things to do and say too. If you haven't already gone to my blog and followed it, I've got all kinds of things on all these people being interviewed. So I just lots of
Yes.
resources there. But Tim, I can't thank you enough. And Melinda, I can't thank you enough. This is a dream come true. And
Yes.
we are going to end up this summer uh, teaching ourselves a lot. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
And
Thanks,
we'll
Sam.
see you. We'll see you all next week again, the same time. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, Professor Rasinski. Thank you, Sam, for being with us. And all have a lovely day. And looking forward to hearing back from you in our poll that we will send out soon on the WhatsApp group. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Prof. Bye.